The first, most sickeningly wrong thing was the silence. Max, Sophie's golden retriever service dog, a joyous 65-pound shadow of warm fur and unwavering devotion, was always at the front door tail, thumping a welcome the moment he heard Anya Sharma's keys in the lock. Today, as Anya stepped into the quiet coolness of their home after a grueling week leading a K-9 trauma response deployment in a hurricane-ravaged coastal town, there was only an unnerving, echoing stillness. Sophie, her 8-year-old daughter, a child whose world was often a maelstrom of sensory overload and anxiety that only Max's calming presence could reliably soothe, should have been in the living room for her afternoon quiet reading time with Max nestled at her feet. Instead, Anya found Sophie curled into a tight, trembling ball on the sofa, her small face buried in a cushion, her shoulders shaking with ragged, silent sobs. Max was nowhere to be seen. "Sophie, sweetheart, what's wrong? Where's Max?" Anya's voice was gentle, but her heart lurched with a sudden cold dread. Years of working with traumatized animals and their equally traumatized human companions had given her a sixth sense for when something was terribly, deeply amiss. Sophie's head lifted, her eyes, usually so bright and expressive when talking about her beloved Max, were red-rimmed, swollen, and filled with a terror that struck Anya to the core. "Maxie." She choked out a fresh wave of sobs, shaking her small frame. He ran out when the back gate was open. I couldn't find him. And then Mrs. Peterson from next door. She brought him back. But Mommy, he's broken." Broken. Anya's mind raced. Had he been hit by a car, attacked by another animal? She rushed to the back of the house, her professional calm warring with a rising tide of maternal panic. And then she saw him. Max, her daughter's lifeline, her furry guardian angel, was huddled in the far corner of the utility room, pressed against the washing machine, as if trying to disappear into the very wall. But it wasn't Max, not really. It was a grotesque caricature. His beautiful flowing golden coat, the soft fur Sophie buried her face in when overwhelmed, the fur Anya herself often stroked for comfort, was gone. In its place was a patchwork of unevenly shaved pink, irritated skin, dotted with angry red nicks and razor burns. He looked naked, alien, a bizarre plucked version of his former self. His tail, usually a joyous metronome, was clamped tight between his legs. He was trembling uncontrollably, his eyes wide, with a fear so profound it made Anya's own breath catch in her throat. He didn't even lift his head at her approach, just flinched and tried to press himself further into the corner, a low, keening whimper escaping him. This was not just a bad haircut. This was an act of mutilation. This was trauma inflicted and absolute. "Oh, Max," Anya whispered, her voice thick with horror and a sudden blazing anger. She knelt slowly, extending a hand, murmuring soft, reassuring words, drawing on every ounce of her K-9 trauma expertise. "Vich, what did she do to you, boy? What did she do?" As if summoned by the question, Karen Peterson, their HOA president and next-door neighbor, appeared in the open doorway connecting the utility room to the kitchen, a pair of electric clippers dangling from one hand, a smug, self-satisfied smile on her face. Tufts of golden fur still clung to her sensible navy blue cardigan. "Well, there you are, Dr. Sharma," Karen said, her voice bright, almost cheerful, a horrifying counterpoint to the scene of devastation before Anya. "I found your Max running loose in my prize-winning azaleas again. He was looking awfully shaggy, an absolute mess of tangles and burrs. So I decided to do you both a favor. A good, thorough grooming. Teach him a lesson about staying out of other people's yards, and teach Sophie here about responsible pet ownership. He's much neater now, don't you think? Less shedding for everyone to worry about. You really should thank me." Anya stared at Karen Peterson, at the clippers, at the tufts of Max's golden fur, at her traumatized daughter, at the shivering, butchered animal cowering in the corner. The world seemed to tilt, a red mist of rage momentarily blinding her. But then her training years of it, decades of it as a K-9 trauma response leader, an expert in animal cruelty service animal law, and the profound psychological impact of such violations slammed into place. This wasn't just a misguided act by an ignorant neighbor. This was a calculated, malicious assault on a registered service animal, a federally protected medical aid, and by extension, an assault on her disabled child. Karen Peterson, in her monumental arrogance and breathtaking cruelty, had just unleashed a force she couldn't possibly comprehend. She had trapped and tortured a service dog, and she had done it to the one person in the state, perhaps the country, uniquely qualified and professionally obligated to bring her to justice. The smile on Karen Peterson's face, Anya vowed, would be wiped off permanently. The fight for Max and for Sophie had just begun. The immediate priority was Max's welfare. Anya, her voice now devoid of all emotion, save for a chilling professional calm, instructed Karen Peterson not to move, not to touch anything, informing her in clipped, precise terms that she had just committed a federal felony and was being detained pending the arrival of law enforcement and animal control. Karen's smug smile faltered, replaced by a look of indignant surprise, then a dawning, but still incomplete understanding that she might have overstepped. "Detained. Don't be ridiculous, I was helping," she sputtered. "You were committing an act of aggravated animal cruelty against a registered service animal, Mrs. Peterson." Anya stated, her eyes like chips of ice. "That carries severe state and federal penalties, including significant prison time and substantial fines. You have the right to remain silent. I strongly advise you to exercise it." While Ben, who had arrived home in the midst of this unfolding horror, took a sobbing Sophie into another room, trying to shield her from the worst of the immediate confrontation, Anya made 2 calls. The first was to their trusted emergency veterinarian, Dr. Ramirez, alerting her to an incoming critical case of animal abuse and trauma. The second was to her direct superior at the National K-9 Trauma Response Center, a specialized division within FEMA that liaised with the Department of Justice on cases involving service animals. "Director Evans," Anya said, "it's Sharma. I have a code red. Service animal assault malicious injury victim is my daughter's golden retriever, Max. Perpetrator is detained on site, my neighbor. I need an immediate interagency response. Local law enforcement, state animal cruelty investigators, and a federal liaison from the DOJ's Civil Rights Division specializing in ADA violations pertaining to service animals. Max requires urgent veterinary care and full forensic documentation." Yelped. Director Evans, a woman who had seen Anya handle the aftermath of earthquakes, wildfires, and terrorist attacks with unwavering competence, knew from the ice in Anya's voice that this was not just a professional crisis, but a deeply personal one. "Understood, Anya. Consider it done. Full resources are en route. How are you and Sophie holding up?" "Sophie is devastated. Max is severely traumatized physically and psychologically." Anya said, her voice tight. "I'll manage. Just get your teams here." The next few hours were a maelstrom of activity. Local police arrived first, securing the scene, taking preliminary statements, and formally arresting a now blustering, then weeping, then sullenly silent Karen Peterson, who seemed to finally grasp that her helpful grooming session was being treated as a major crime. Animal control officers, grim-faced and experienced, assisted Anya in gently coaxing a terrified Max into a specialized transport carrier. The sight of Max, so diminished, so unlike his usual confident, joyful self, cowering and trembling as he was carried out, sent a fresh wave of anguish through Sophie, who watched heartbroken from the window. At Dr. Ramirez's clinic, the full extent of Karen Peterson's cruelty became apparent. Max's skin was raw, abraded and inflamed from the rough, unskilled use of the clippers. There were multiple small lacerations, some already showing signs of infection. He was severely dehydrated and exhibiting clear signs of psychological shock, rapid heartbeat, dilated pupils, extreme fear aggression when anyone other than Anya approached him. The act of shaving a double-coated breed like a golden retriever down to the skin, Dr. Ramirez explained, was not only disfiguring, but also dangerous, stripping him of his natural insulation against heat and cold, and exposing his sensitive skin to sunburn and infection. It could take months for his coat to regrow properly, if it ever fully did, and the psychological scars might linger even longer. "This wasn't grooming Anya," Dr. Ramirez said, her voice filled with a quiet fury. "This was torture." She meticulously documented every injury, took skin scrapings, and drew blood for analysis, her findings forming the bedrock of the animal cruelty case. Meanwhile, Anya's home had become a command center. Federal agents, state investigators, and her own K-9 trauma response colleagues converged, each bringing their specialized expertise to bear. They collected the electric clippers Karen had used, bagging them as evidence. They carefully gathered samples of Max's shaved fur from Karen Peterson's yard, and home a warrant having been swiftly obtained. They interviewed neighbors, some of whom reluctantly admitted to having heard Max yelping in distress from Karen's yard earlier that day, but had been too intimidated by her to intervene. They reviewed security footage from nearby homes, piecing together a timeline of Karen's actions, luring Max into her yard when he had briefly escaped through a gate accidentally left ajar by a utilities worker trapping him in her garage, and then the hours-long ordeal of his grooming. Sophie was the most immediate and heart-wrenching casualty after Max himself. Her world revolved around Max. He was her confidant, her protector, her furry, four-legged anxiety medication. He was trained to recognize the subtle signs of her impending sensory overload or panic attacks, providing deep pressure therapy by leaning against her or leading her to a quiet space. Without Max by her side, his familiar weight, his calming scent, his gentle nuzzles, Sophie's carefully constructed coping mechanisms began to crumble. She became withdrawn, hypervigilant, prone to meltdowns over the smallest triggers. Her schoolwork suffered. Her sleep was plagued by nightmares. The joyous, imaginative child, Anya knew, seemed to be disappearing, swallowed by a grief and fear that were too big for her small frame to bear. Anya, while coordinating the multi-agency investigation with a steely professionalism that awed her colleagues, was also trying to navigate the treacherous emotional landscape of her own home. She was a mother watching her child suffer a handler, watching her beloved animal endure unimaginable trauma, and a K-9 expert acutely aware of the long, difficult road to recovery that lay ahead for both of them. The irony was not lost on her. She, who led teams into disaster zones to rescue and rehabilitate traumatized animals, was now facing one of a K-9 trauma response leader, her most challenging cases in her own backyard. Karen Peterson, after a tearful arraignment where her bewildered husband posted a substantial bail, returned to her home next door, her movements now restricted by a court order prohibiting any contact with the Sharma family or their animals. But her presence, her proximity, was a constant looming threat. She didn't overtly harass them, but her car would be parked just so her blinds would twitch at odd hours, small unnerving reminders that the source of their trauma was just a few feet away. The Liberty Glen Gardens HOA, of which Karen was president, was initially thrown into chaos. The board issued a tepid, lawyer-vetted statement expressing concern over the incident and promising a full internal review. It was clear to Anya that Karen's influence still held sway, that many board members were either loyal to her or terrified of her. The first official communication Anya received from the HOA was not an apology or an offer of support, but a notice of violation for failure to properly secure a domestic animal, resulting in said animal trespassing on a neighbor's property. It was a breathtaking piece of victim blaming so clearly orchestrated by Karen that Anya almost admired its audacity, if not for the cold rage it provoked. Anya's response was swift and unequivocal. She sent the HOA board and Karen Peterson's attorney a detailed legal dossier outlining the specific state and federal laws Karen had violated, including the ADA provisions protecting service animals, felony animal cruelty statutes with enhanced penalties for service animals in their state, and potential charges of intentional infliction of emotional distress on a minor. She included Dr. Ramirez's full veterinary report, photographs of Max's injuries, and a preliminary estimate of the costs for his ongoing care, rehabilitation, and the potential need to retire him from service and train a new dog for Sophie, a process that could take years and cost tens of thousands of dollars. She made it clear that she intended to pursue every available legal avenue, both criminal and civil, to ensure Karen Peterson was held fully accountable. But Karen Peterson, it seemed, was not without her own twisted resources. A local tabloid newspaper known for its sensationalist reporting suddenly ran a story headlined, "Service Dog or Neighborhood Nuisance HOA President Claims Self-Defense in Bizarre Grooming Incident." The article filled with anonymous quotes from concerned neighbors. Clearly Karen's allies painted Max as an aggressive, poorly trained animal, and Karen as a well-meaning community leader who had simply tried to help a neglected dog, only to be targeted by an overzealous federal agent with a personal vendetta. It was a vile piece of character assassination designed to muddy the waters and garner public sympathy for Karen. The online comments sections exploded with a predictable mix of outrage at Karen's actions and victim-blaming vitriol directed at Anya and Sophie. Anya, who had dealt with public scrutiny and media manipulation in her professional life, tried to shield Sophie from the worst of it, but the poison was seeping into their community, creating divisions, fostering doubt. Some neighbors who had initially expressed support now grew distant, unwilling to be drawn into what was becoming an increasingly ugly and public battle. The next escalation came in the form of a visit from Child Protective Services. An anonymous complaint had been filed, alleging that Sophie was being emotionally harmed by her mother's obsessive focus on the family dog, and that the unstable home environment created by the ongoing legal battle was detrimental to the child's well-being. Anya knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that Karen Peterson was behind this, a desperate, malicious attempt to use Sophie as a pawn to intimidate Anya into dropping the charges. The CPS investigation, though, handled professionally and ultimately dismissed as unfounded after a thorough review of Sophie's situation and interviews with her therapists and teachers, was a deeply violating and traumatic experience for both Anya and Sophie. To have her fitness as a mother questioned, to have strangers scrutinize her child's pain, all because of Karen Peterson's vendetta, pushed Anya to a new level of cold-focused fury. This was no longer just about justice for Max. This was about protecting her daughter from a predator who would stop at nothing. Anya realized that Karen Peterson was not just a neighborhood bully or an ignorant busybody. There was a deeper, more disturbing pathology at play, a profound lack of empathy, coupled with a manipulative intelligence and a relentless drive to control and dominate. It was during a late-night review of Karen Peterson's background, conducted by her own trusted analyst at the K-9 Trauma Response Center, that the midpoint twist began to emerge. Karen Peterson had a history, a sealed juvenile record from another state involving cruelty to small animals. And more recently, there were unsubstantiated but persistent rumors within online breeder forums and rescue networks about a backyard groomer in their general area, who was known for offering cheap, often rough services, and who had been accused by several clients of mishandling their pets, though no formal charges had ever stuck. The descriptions of this shadowy figure, the discount dog shaver, bore an unsettling resemblance to Karen Peterson's methods and her apparent access to professional-grade clippers. Could it be? Was Karen Peterson running some kind of clandestine, unlicensed, and possibly abusive animal-related business from her home? Was her obsession with grooming and neatness a cover for something far more sinister? If so, Max's accidental trespass into her yard and Anya's subsequent highly visible and professional response to his mutilation might have threatened to expose not just her cruelty, but an entire illegal enterprise. This would explain her increasingly desperate and malicious tactics. She wasn't just trying to avoid accountability for hurting Max, she was trying to protect a secret life. Anya felt a shiver of horrified understanding. The case had just taken on a new, even more complex dimension. She immediately shared her suspicions and the preliminary findings with the lead state animal cruelty investigator and the DOJ liaison. If Karen Peterson was involved in a broader pattern of animal abuse or an illegal animal business, the charges against her could escalate dramatically. The upcoming HOA emergency meeting, which Karen, in a display of stunning arrogance, had demanded ostensibly to clear her name and address the issue of dangerous animals in the community, was now shaping up to be a confrontation of epic proportions. Anya, armed with not only the evidence of Max's assault, but also the tantalizing, terrifying possibility of a much larger criminal operation, prepared to face her tormentor in a public forum, determined to unmask her once and for all. The quiet, leafy streets of Willow Glen Gardens were about to become the stage for a drama that would expose the darkest secrets hidden behind its pristine facades. The air in the Willow Glen Gardens community clubhouse was thick with an almost unbearable tension. Every folding chair was occupied, and residents stood shoulder to shoulder along the walls, their faces a mixture of apprehension, anger, and morbid curiosity. This emergency HOA meeting, ostensibly called by the board at Karen Peterson's insistence to discuss community safety and pet ownership standards, was understood by everyone present to be a referendum on Karen herself and a public arena for the escalating conflict between her and Dr. Anya Sharma. Karen sat at the head table, flanked by a grim-faced, expensive-looking lawyer, and the few remaining HOA board members still loyal to her, her expression a carefully constructed mask of wronged dignity. Anya sat in the front row with Sophie, who, though visibly anxious, had insisted on being there. Max, still recovering but now sporting a soft, protective bodysuit over his irritated skin, lay quietly at Sophie's feet, a tangible, heartbreaking symbol of the cruelty that had precipitated this crisis. Several of Anya's colleagues from the K-9 Trauma Response Center, along with state animal cruelty investigators and a discreet representative from the U.S. Attorney's Office, were strategically positioned throughout the room, their presence a silent testament to the gravity of the situation. The acting HOA president, a nervous man named Arthur Jenkins, gavelled the meeting to order, his voice trembling. "This special meeting has been called," he began, his eyes darting nervously towards Karen, then Anya, "to address concerns raised by our president, Ms. Karen Peterson, regarding, recent events and the responsible management of domestic animals within our community." Karen Peterson immediately seized the microphone, her voice dripping with theatrical pathos. She launched into a lengthy, self-serving diatribe, portraying herself as a dedicated community volunteer, a victim of a vicious, orchestrated smear campaign by an overzealous federal employee with a personal grudge. She spoke of her love for all animals and her well-intentioned attempt to help a neglected dog, twisting the facts of Max's mutilation into an act of misguided kindness. She painted Anya as an unstable, hysterical mother, using her government connections to persecute an innocent citizen. She even had the audacity to suggest that Max's injuries were exaggerated or self-inflicted. It was a performance worthy of a seasoned con artist, and a few of her staunchest supporters in the audience murmured their agreement, though many more looked on with expressions of open disgust. When Karen finally relinquished the microphone, a heavy silence fell over the room. Then Anya Sharma rose to speak. Her voice, in contrast to Karen's histrionics, was calm, measured, but with an undercurrent of cold, diamond-hard anger that cut through the oppressive atmosphere. "Good evening." She began, her gaze sweeping across the assembled residents before locking onto Karen Peterson. "I am Dr. Anya Sharma. This is my daughter, Sophie. And this," she gestured to the recovering Max at Sophie's feet, "is Max, Sophie's registered service animal, a federally protected medical aid, and a beloved member of our family. He is also the victim of a brutal, premeditated act of animal cruelty perpetrated by Ms. Karen Peterson." With methodical precision, Anya dismantled Karen's web of lies. She presented large, clear photographs of Max before the assault, a vibrant, healthy golden retriever with a magnificent coat. Then she displayed the graphic veterinary photographs of Max after Karen's helpful grooming, his shaved, bleeding skin, the raw abrasions, the terror in his eyes. The visual evidence was sickening, irrefutable. Gasps of horror rippled through the audience. She detailed the medical diagnosis, severe trauma chemical burns from an inappropriate cleaning agent Karen had apparently used, and the long, painful road to recovery Max faced. She read excerpts from Sophie's therapist's report, outlining the profound emotional distress and regression Sophie had suffered due to the attack on her service animal. "This was not an act of kindness, Ms. Peterson." Anya said, her voice ringing with controlled fury. "This was a calculated act of torture designed to inflict maximum suffering on an innocent animal and to terrorize a disabled child. This was a hate crime targeting a service animal and the child who depends on him." Then, Anya played a short, chilling audio recording, enhanced by FBI technicians, captured from a neighbor's security system that had picked up sounds from Karen's garage on the day of the assault. Max's terrified yelps and whimpers were clearly audible, punctuated by Karen's cold, impatient voice saying, "Hold still, you wretched beast. I'll teach you to shed in my yard. I'll make you wish you'd never been born." The raw cruelty of the recording left the room in stunned, horrified silence. Karen Peterson's face had gone ashen. Her lawyer was frantically whispering in her ear, but Anya was not finished. "Ms. Peterson's cruelty, it appears, is not limited to my daughter's service animal. Our investigation has uncovered a pattern of behavior, a history that suggests a far more disturbing reality." Shame. She then presented the evidence her team had been quietly gathering, the sealed juvenile records detailing prior acts of animal cruelty. The anonymous but consistent online reports about a discount dog shaver in their area known for rough handling and causing injuries to pets. The suspicious purchases of bulk low-grade grooming supplies Karen had made. the unsettling number of stray animal complaints that seemed to originate from the vicinity of Karen's property. "We believe," Anya stated, her voice now resonating with the full authority of her professional expertise, "that Ms. Karen Peterson has been operating an illegal, unlicensed, and likely abusive animal grooming or boarding operation from her home, preying on unsuspecting pet owners with offers of cheap services, and potentially mistreating, neglecting, or even disposing of animals that became inconvenient or unprofitable." As Anya spoke these words, a commotion erupted at the back of the clubhouse. The doors burst open, and a team of uniformed animal control officers, state cruelty investigators, and several of Anya's own K-9 trauma response specialists, acting on a warrant that had just been approved based on the mounting evidence, entered the room. They were not heading for the podium, but directly out the side door of the clubhouse, towards Karen Peterson's adjacent property. The meeting dissolved into chaos. Residents surged towards the windows trying to see what was happening. Karen Peterson began to scream a raw, animalistic sound of pure panic. "No, stay out of my house, you have no right." Her lawyer tried to intervene, but he was brushed aside by a stern-faced state investigator holding up a signed warrant. Minutes later, the first of the rescued animals began to be brought out of Karen Peterson's home, a dozen small-breed dogs, matted emaciated cowering in filthy, undersized cages that had been hidden in her garage and basement. Several cats, equally neglected, were found locked in a bathroom. The stench, even from a distance, was overwhelming. The residents of Willow Glen Gardens watched in stunned, horrified silence as the true, ugly secret of their HOA president's home was revealed. It was not a sanctuary of order and neatness, but a house of horrors for innocent animals. Karen Peterson, her face a mask of utter ruin, collapsed into her chair, sobbing hysterically as a federal agent and a state investigator approached her. "Karen Peterson." The federal agent said, his voice devoid of emotion, "You are under arrest for aggravated cruelty to a service animal, multiple counts of felony animal cruelty, operating an unlicensed kennel, and violations of state and federal animal welfare laws. You have the right to remain silent." As Karen was handcuffed and led away, a wailing, pathetic figure, the community stood in shocked silence, the full weight of her depravity, her betrayal finally crashing down upon them. Anya knelt beside Max, gently stroking his recovering head, while Sophie, tears streaming down her face, hugged her beloved dog. It was a victory, hard-won and heartbreaking, but a victory nonetheless. The reign of Karen Peterson was over. The long, difficult process of healing for Max, for Sophie, for the rescued animals, and for the entire community of Willow Glen Gardens had just begun. The aftermath of Karen Peterson's arrest and the unmasking of her secret animal abuse operation was a period of profound upheaval and reckoning for the Willow Glen Gardens community. The sheer scale of her cruelty, hidden for so long beneath a veneer of civic righteousness, left residents reeling. The dozen dogs and several cats rescued from her home were in deplorable condition, requiring extensive veterinary care, rehabilitation, and socialization before they could even be considered for adoption. Anya's K-9 trauma response organization, along with local shelters and rescue groups, stepped in to provide the specialized care these traumatized animals so desperately needed. Several of the rescued dogs, it was discovered, had been stolen pets from surrounding neighborhoods, their owners having searched for them in vain for months, even years. The tearful reunions, when they occurred, were a small beacon of light amidst the darkness of Karen's crimes. Karen Peterson herself faced a barrage of state and federal charges. The evidence against her was overwhelming: the testimony of Anya and Sophie, the irrefutable veterinary reports on Max's injuries, the audio recording of her abusing him, the horrific conditions found in her home, and the testimony of several pet owners who had previously used her clandestine grooming services and whose animals had suffered unexplained injuries or illnesses afterward. Her expensive lawyer, realizing the hopelessness of her case, focused on negotiating a plea deal that would spare her the spectacle of a public trial and potentially lessen her sentence, citing her age and alleged mental fragility, a claim that was met with derision by the prosecution and the victims. The Willow Glen Gardens HOA was effectively dismantled and rebuilt from the ground up. The remaining board members, tainted by their association with Karen or their willful blindness to her actions, resigned in disgrace. a new interim board composed of residents genuinely committed to transparency, animal welfare, and community well-being, including at the community's insistence, Anya Sharma, as a non-voting expert advisor on animal-related issues, was elected. Their first act was to issue a formal public apology to Anya, Sophie, and Max, and to pledge HOA funds to help cover the costs of care for the animals rescued from Karen's property. They also established a partnership with local animal shelters, promoting responsible pet ownership and supporting adoption events. The oppressive, punitive HOA bylaws Karen had so zealously enforced were systematically reviewed and rewritten, replaced with common-sense guidelines that fostered a more inclusive, pet-friendly, and compassionate community. Max's recovery was a slow, painstaking process, but under Anya's expert care and Sophie's unwavering love, he began to heal both physically and emotionally. His beautiful golden coat started to regrow patchy at first, then gradually thickening into its former glory. The nicks and razor burns faded, leaving only faint scars on his sensitive skin. More importantly, the terror in his eyes began to recede, replaced by glimmers of his old, joyful, trusting self. He started initiating play again, his tail giving tentative, then enthusiastic thumps. He resumed his service dog duties for Sophie with a quiet, steadfast devotion, his presence once again her anchor in a world that often felt too overwhelming. The bond between child and dog, already profound, had been forged even stronger in the crucible of their shared trauma. Sophie, too, began to heal. With Max back by her side, her anxieties lessened, her confidence slowly returned. She started a scrapbook, a Max the Hero book, filled with drawings and stories about his bravery and their adventures, together a therapeutic outlet for her emotions. She even started volunteering with Anya at one of the shelters caring for the animals rescued from Karen's house, her innate empathy for creatures in distress finding a positive, empowering channel. Karen Peterson eventually pleaded guilty to multiple felony counts of aggravated animal cruelty, cruelty to a service animal, and operating an illegal kennel. The judge, visibly moved by the victim impact statements from Anya Sophie, who bravely read her statement with Max by her side, and the owners of the other animals Karen had harmed, sentenced her to a significant prison term, followed by a lifetime ban on owning or residing with animals and mandatory psychological counseling. Her assets were seized to help pay for the veterinary care of her victims and to fund animal welfare organizations. Her reign of terror was well and truly over. Months later, on a bright spring morning, Willow Glen Gardens held its first annual Pause for Celebration event in the community park. It was a day of joy, of healing, of community solidarity with residents and their beloved pets, enjoying games demonstrations by service animal organizations and adoption booths from local shelters. Max, his golden coat gleaming in the sun, his tail waving proudly, was the guest of honor, receiving a special Community Hero Award from the new HOA president. Sophie, beaming with pride, stood beside him, her hand resting gently on his head. Anya watched them, a quiet sense of peace settling in her heart. The journey had been harrowing, the wounds deep, but they had faced the darkness, and they had overcome it. The cruelty of one individual had paradoxically brought out the best in many others, forging new bonds of compassion and resilience within their community. Max's ordeal had become a catalyst for positive change, a testament to the unbreakable spirit of a service animal and the fierce love of the child he protected. As Sophie and Max took a well-deserved bow to the applause of their neighbors, Anya knew that this was more than just a happy ending. It was a new beginning, a promise of a kinder, more vigilant, and more compassionate future for Willow Glen Gardens, a future where every wagging tail, every trusting nuzzle, every bark of joy was a cherished note in the symphony of their shared lives. The work of a K-9 trauma response leader, she reflected, was not just about responding to trauma, but about fostering the conditions for healing, for hope, and for the enduring power of the human-animal bond to triumph over cruelty. And in that, she had found her deepest calling, both professionally and personally. 1.